Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 126. But before we get into that, just a little catch-up. In the last issue, we saw John come back from America, and things kind of went topsy-turvy for him and all his friends. We saw Muppet get hit by a car, and it turns out that car was being driven by a man who was after John at the moment, who is named Gavin. And Gavin blames John for the death of his girlfriend, Pam. Even though Gavin was driving and it was a car accident that caused all this, he blames John because he's been seeing Pam, a ghost of Pam, he thinks, and she has been telling him all these lies about John and how John was the one who actually got him drunk or drugged him and then sent Gavin and Pam on their way home in a car while Gavin was under the influence. And that's what caused all of this. At least that's what Gavin thinks. And we can definitely tell that the ghost of Pam is something evil. It's definitely manipulating Gavin into thinking this, and also part of its goal is to separate John from all of his friend network. So as of right now, I believe all of John's friends are mad at him, except Danny. She has not been affected yet. But we can probably assume that because we did find out who Pam is, who this evil entity is, at the end of the last issue, and it turns out that Pam is Chantanelli. And if you remember the last time John and Chantanelli got together, it worked out well for John and not so much for Chantanelli. So she's trying to get her revenge because John stole that piece of her that gave him an edge. So she has left her cave where she was in hiding from the First of the Fallen because of everything that happened at the end of the Garth Ennis run, where she tricked the First of the Fallen in order to help John, and he had to carve a sigil in her soul so that the devil couldn't find her, but that also meant that she had to live in this cave. So first things first, with issue 126, we got the cover. We see a woman, maybe Danny, maybe Chantanelli, I'm not quite sure, who is standing in some flames. She's wearing a trench coat, but it looks like she's naked underneath. And it's kind of like she's basking in the flames, like almost like she likes them. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Warren Pleece. And as we turn to the first page, we see John, and he is where he was at the beginning of the last issue, where he's sitting in the middle of the woods. There's a fire in front of him, and he seems to be talking to himself. And he's saying, "A clever little bleeder was Oscar Wilde. He wants to find a cynic as a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Call me a cynic, then." And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is How to Play with Fire Part 2, Fanning the Flames. Then we turn the page and we cut to the end of the last issue where John is standing outside in the dark by a tree, and he lights up a cigarette, and there's a car that's parked on the curb in front of John, but he doesn't see the two people inside who are Gavin and Chantanelli. And as John lights his cigarette, his narration says, "Can't blame me for being in a bit stroppy mind. I mean, it's not every day that the Lord of the Lupins himself shows up on your doorstep and accuses you of supernatural genocide." And if you don't remember what he's talking about, this is exactly where the last issue left off, and he had just got yelled at by Jack of the Green, who was accusing him of murdering a bunch of people in Abaton. And John's narration continues. "Even worse when he fucks off into a nearby tree, before you've had a chance to think of a clever response. It's all I can do to just stand there like a prat, making up jokes about pruning shears, completely unaware that I'm about to get my second verbal buggering of the night." So as John stands and smokes, all of a sudden Gavin's car begins to roll towards him, and Gavin rolls down his window and says, "Hello, John. Remember me?" And John looks in the window and says, "Do I know you, mate?" And when he does this, we can see that Pam, or Chantanelli, is no longer in the passenger seat. And Gavin, who's trying to play it cool and casual, kind of laughs at John and says, "Ha ha, spiffing wheeze and all that, Connors. You're still quite the card, I see." And then he turns to his passenger seat that is empty, and he says, "What do you think, love? Shall we play along? Pretend we're taken in by that disarming London patter of his?" And Chantanelli must be there, just not seen by John, because he answers her saying, "Yes, you're right. I didn't do us any favors last time." But he's just speaking to an empty seat next to him. Then we cut back to John in the present, who is sitting in front of the fire, and he says, "Naturally, the we is a bit of a giveaway. I'm thinking either this bloke's medication's worn off, or he's some previously unknown member of the royal family. Then I remember where I've seen him before." Then we cut back into the flashback, and John is staring at Gavin, and he says, "Here, you're Gavin Pomeroy, aren't you? I haven't seen you since..." And Gavin cuts him off saying, "Since you ruined my life, you heinous bastard." Then John kind of awkwardly says, "Right, well, game's up then, Gav. You win a point or something, right?" And Gavin replies, "She was my bloody soul, mate. You unconscionable little snot rag. Not that it matters to a man such as you, I'm sure. Oh, I found out about your little slip-ups over the years. An accidental death here and there. But the friends always come back, don't they? Not this time." And then he pulls away from the curb and he begins to drive away, and he calls back, "I've driven them all away. For good. If you don't believe me, try calling one of them. Any of them. I want you to." Then we cut back to present, where John is sitting in front of the fire again, and he turns and looks at us like maybe he's about to break the fourth wall, and he says, "And you know what the weirdest part of it was? He never even told me what I was supposed to have done." Then we turn the page, and we cut to Weeble, who is doing some sort of channeling session. And if you remember a couple issues back, when he was helping John out, John gave him the medallion from Aleister Crowley. So that is who Weeble is trying to talk to, because he's saying, "So, tell us again, Allie. What does it look like?" And Aleister Crowley answers saying, "Doesn't it look like fuck all, you daft bastard? It's a state of mind full of big, mean devils and vats of scalding porridge." And then Weeble looks kind of annoyed, and he says, "Yeah, but what's the landscape like? I mean, are there any buildings or caves and stuff?" Aleister answers, "Look, you big plank." And then Aleister feels something, and he says, "Wait, there's someone there. Oh, crikey, not him, not him." Then Weeble turns his head in fear, and he sees Boor walking towards him, and Boor says, "Hello, Crowley. I wish I could say it's a pleasure to see you again." And I should say, Boor looks really creepy because he's coming out of the shadows, but he has his signature yellow eyes, so they're kind of the only thing that can really be seen. And Weeble does not know who Boor is, so he stands up when he sees Boor, and he says, "Whoever you are, this is private property. I mean, I can call the police." And then Boor says some magical words saying, "Azane, Ane Boor." And then he thrusts his hand out like he's trying to do something magically, and he says, "I hear you within, Crowley. Is it not customary to face me under this circumstance?" And Weeble kind of falls backward as Aleister Crowley's energy is pulled out of him. Then a yellow energy version of Aleister Crowley flies through the air and lands on the floor in front of Boor, and he says, "Boor, mother of mercy, I didn't mean to get away from you like, but the devil..." And Boor cuts him off saying, "Calm yourself, Aleister. The game has changed for both of us. I no longer seek reimbursement for my services rendered. In fact, I have come here with a proposition." And of course, he says this last line with a very sinister smile on his face. And Aleister looks kind of dumbstruck, and he says, "A proposition? You mean you're not here to bite my ghoulies off?" And Boor answers, "Much good it would do me. Your torment is now overseen by the first of the fallen, as is mine, thanks to our mutual antagonist." And this seems like new information to Aleister, who says, "Constantine? Constantine shafted Yez too?" And Boor answers, "Yes, but I have discovered a delicious loophole that may yet prove to be his undoing. You see, my position notwithstanding, your soul is still mine by right. Since I am powerless to claim it, I offer you this. Turn yourself willingly over to my charge, and I will amend our previous agreement, an end to your torment, since the act of our merger supersedes any previous obligation." And Aleister seems to get very excited about this offer, and he says, "Yeah, you clever wee bastard! But how are we going to stay out here, away from the big yin?" And then Crowley points down at Weeble's limp body and says, "My dear Crowley, you've already found our solution." Then we cut back to John, who is just getting inside from having talked to Gavin, and we see him standing at the bottom of the stairs of his flat, looking at Straff's door, and the narration says, "What an odd bloke," you think, as you trudge off indoors. But that's about as much mind as you're willing to pay it. What with all the other troubles you've got? Still, you reason, it never hurts to make sure. Then we see John walk over to Straff's apartment and knock and say, "Oi, Straff!" And he doesn't get a reply right away, so he kneels down and looks into the letter slot and he says, "Straff, you in there, mate? It's me, John." But nothing moves in the house. Then we cut to some panels inside, where it's just all dark, and we see Straff sitting alone in front of the TV, holding his head and crying. And the narration over these panels says, "You give one last holler, just in case he can't hear you, over the clamor of clocks. But he can't hear you, or won't. Not through his haze of diabetic fatigue and electronic stimulation, and the onset of clinical depression." Then we turn the page, and we cut to John walking down an alley. It is raining outside, and the narration continues saying, "Been far too long," you lie to yourself, as you wander up Water Street. As if by thinking it, you somehow justify all the years you've never bothered to visit. As if that's the real reason you've come back. As if you really care. Then we see John stop at a wooden door in this alley, and he knocks, and we see a man come out and he says, "What do you want?" And John says, "Christ, Tony, is it too much of a stretch to believe I came by to say hello?" And Tony replies, "Not bloody likely." And in case you forget who Tony is, he is the husband of John's sister Cheryl, and he kind of pops into their lives every now and then, but it has definitely been a while since we've seen them. And Tony continues saying to John, "You selfish little bastard. You think you can just pop in without so much as a by your leave? Where were you when we moved house last month? Or when Cheryl had tonsillitis? Having the time of your life down in that bloody cesspit, that's where." And then he slams the door in John's face, and through the door he yells, "So why don't you just fuck off back to where you belong?" And as he says this, we can see in one of the windows, there's a silhouette of a woman, so we can assume either Cheryl or Gemma, his niece, was listening to that. Then we turn the page and we cut to a diner, where we see John is drinking a cup of coffee or tea, and a young woman approaches him and says, "There you are, Uncle John." And I don't remember the last time we saw Gemma, but this woman looks like she's maybe 18 or 19, and I feel like the last time we saw her, she was in her early teens. So she sits down at the table with John, and she actually pulls out one of his cigarettes and says, "Sorry, I've been gasping for one." And John says, "Oi, since when did you pick them up?" And as she lights her cigarette, she says, "Since I found out they were bad for me. Look, I came here to tell you something. Don't blame me, Dad, all right? It ain't his fault. Something's happening, Uncle John. I would have told you before, but Ma'am said not to. She said he was better off left alone." Then we get a panel that looks like a memory from Gemma, and we see her and her parents sitting at the breakfast table, but they look very worried and they're kind of staring at each other. And Gemma narrates over this saying, "It started a few days ago. We all began to have the same dream. Dad mentioned it first, and me and Mum was like, 'Christ, that happened to us.' But it's still going on. No one wants to talk about it. Breakfast has been bloody horrible for days now." And then she tells him what the dream is, saying, "It's Granddad." Then we get a flash of John's dad, who is still stuck in that house with all the hangers, if you remember from issue 100. And Gemma narrates saying, I've seen him, all tortured and twisted like, in hell. You're there, and he's screaming his head off at you. Says it was you that sent him there." Then we cut back to the diner, and we see Gemma looking kind of distraught, and she says, "Oh God, he's in pain, Uncle John, and I know that he blames you for it. What did you do to him?" And John answers, "Listen, kid, what happened with your granddad? He did it all to himself, all right? There was a lot of stuff that went down, Gemma. You know what the old bastard was like." And then Gemma stands up and says, "Yeah, I know. Listen, Uncle John, don't come back for a while, eh? It's probably for the best." And then she leaves sobbing. Then we turn the page and we cut to a while later as John is getting off the train at his stop, and the narration says, "You get the feeling it's happening, just as Gavin Pomeroy said it would. You're stricken by the futility of it all. Your heart's fit to burst, overwhelmed by emptiness, like the proverbial tube station at midnight. because you're the only one who knows the truth. That this was bound to happen sooner or later. That everyone's finally seen through your little subterfuge and discovered that you're just as scared of the dark as they are. And they hate you for it. So as John is stepping off of the train, someone next to him says, "Well, hip-hop hooray for you, John." And John turns because he knows that voice. And when he turns to see who it is, he sees his evil self, the one that he split off, sitting on the platform by the train. And Evil John says, "You've really done it this time, haven't you?" And John replies, "Makes sense, I suppose. The return of the prodigal fuckwit. Come to gloat, have you?" But Evil John stands up and he says, No, I haven't. Look, I'm going to be straight with you, which is more than you were with me. It's about my situation. You asked me to go to hell for you, John, but you never thought it out, did you? You never even considered the possibility that anything could go wrong with your wonderful bloody master plan, but it did. You see, Crowley was inside me. He was supposed to be the one who suffered, and I was supposed to get off scot-free. You said that's what would happen, but you hardly considered all the possibilities, did you? For instance, what would become of me if Crowley found a way out? It's happened, John. Crowley's gone, and what makes it truly sublime is that you were the catalyst. You gave Weeble the pendant. It was the connection, and he used it to pull Crowley out of hell. Oh God, John, you knew what it might entail, didn't you? You knew the risk I was taking when you asked me to go there, and now I've got no safety net. You've got to take me back. So as this Evil John is talking, we were getting flashes of what he was saying, so we saw him in hell, and then Alistair kind of pulling out of his body and leaving him there, and then him with his head in his hands as he's now by himself in the lake of fire feeling all the pain. And after hearing Evil John's pleas, John just kind of looks down at his feet and says, "You know I can't do that, mate. Look, I'll sort it out, okay? I always do. I promise." And then he turns away from Evil John and begins to walk away, and Evil John gets very upset and says, You can't possibly be serious, John. I mean, really? Of all people, I know how little your fucking promises mean." Then we turn the page and we cut to John sitting on his bed, smoking and staring at his phone, and the narration says, "Is it worse when your phone rings, you wonder?" Then we cut to a panel of a different phone ringing, and the answering machine picks up and says, "Hi, you've reached Anita White of the Weekly World Star. I'm on assignment in Paris till Monday morning, giving the royal family a rest for the week. Leave a message." And then you hear John's voice say, "Danny, it's John." Then we cut back to John staring at the phone again, and it seems like that was maybe what he thought was going to happen if he called. And the narration continues with its thoughts about, is it worse when your phone rings, saying, or when it doesn't ring at all. Then we see John picking up the phone, and as he pushes the numbers on the pad, he mumbles under his voice, "Shit, come on, come on." Then we see Chaz pick up, and he's got a birthday hat on, and he says, "What? Yeah. Hello, Constantine. Hey? Nah, I can't, mate. Not tonight, anyway." "Do what?" And then he puts a finger in his ear to try to block out the noise from the loud children in the room next door, and he says, "Well, can't you hear the bloody noise, John?" And then he jokingly says, "All these Playboy bunnies will be heartbroken if I get out of the jacuzzi now." And then he covers his ear fully and says, "John, I can't bloody hear a thing you're saying, mate. What was that again?" And then we see John hang up and say, "I said, have a nice life, Chaz." Then John just stays on the bed and he puts his head in his hands, and the narration says, "You hear him then, snarling at you, an unrelenting stream of invective, fueled by his fear of eternity. You can feel the psychic splatter as he relieves himself all over your guilty conscience." Then we get a panel of John's dad yelling out, "You're not my son! You never were! You're nobody!" Then we pull out and we see John's dad is in that house where he's being tortured in hell, and we thought maybe he was talking to John by what he said, but he's actually talking to Evil John, who is also hanging in that room, and Evil John is saying, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so fucking sorry." Then we turn the page, and we cut to the next morning, and Danny is walking up the stairs of John's flat, and she's singing all happy and bringing him groceries, and as she gets into the door, she says, "Hey, babe, it's only me. I'm back from France, and I brought you a fry. So she goes in his house, and as she's opening his bedroom door, she says, wakey, wakey, rise and shine, the weather's fine. And when she opens the door all the way, she sees a naked John laying in bed, and there's a white woman in bed with him, and she is behind him kind of spooning John. And the woman looks up and sees Danny, and she screams out, and then Danny just says, John, oh my God. Oh my God. And then the woman sits up on the bed quickly and covers herself with the blankets and says, Johnny, who's that bloody tart? And John wakes up and he turns and sees this woman and he says, no. And then Danny rushes out of the room and John follows behind her yelling, Danny, you fucking gotta believe me. I don't know how to say it, but this is not what it looks like. Danny! But she does not stop. She just runs out of his flats and out of the building completely crying. So as John hurriedly tries to get dressed, John has seen through the woman's disguise and he knows it's Chantinelli because as she says, hadn't you better go after her? Christ, at least make the attempt, John. As John rushes out of the room, he turns to her and says, Ellie, I don't know what you're up to, but I fucking swear. And Ellie kind of laughs and says, yeah, hurry back, stud muffin. Then we cut to John running out of his building, and we see Danny trying to get her keys out and get into her car, and she's saying to herself, oh my God, I don't believe this is fucking happening. And as she opens the door to get in, John reaches her and says, Danny, wait, love, you've got to just let me explain, okay? And a very angry Danny turns to him and says, let you fucking explain? What, the she meant nothing to me explanation? Or the I'll never do it again? You motherfucker! I never pegged you for the type, John, but I should have known. Lying is what you do best. Then she gets in her car and she drives away and John just says, shit. Then we see Chantinelli walk out of the front door as well behind him and she says, I wouldn't worry. You're far too good for her. And a very angry John says, you didn't need to do that. Then Chantinelli walks up to him and begins buttoning his shirt, and she says, yes, I did, as a matter of fact. God, you never even saw it coming, did you? And then she walks away from him, and John yells after her, don't flatter yourself, you fucking whore. I know you've got that amateur conjurer Gavin Pomeroy under your thumb, but it's not going to work. I'm out of your league. And then Chantinelli stops, and as she turns around, she says, well, guilty as charged, I suppose. But remember, I'm a succubus. That's the way it works in case you've forgotten. Then she gives him the finger and says, get ready to be fucked by a pro. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So it's finally coming to light. John is aware that Chantinelli is doing all of this to him, and we will have to see how he handles that in the next issue. So until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.